Ambient occlusion is a type of map that captures the shadows on an object that are cast by that object onto itself. So they're fairly subtle, but they do allow us to take some light information that we wouldn't usually get in a game, like cast ambient occlusion, and burn it into our models. We usually use ambient occlusion on props and environmental objects, not on characters, because the characters are moving around in the scene and the light should affect them in real time, where the props are usually static and will look a lot better with something like ambient occlusion because they're not moving around. Let's hop over here to my material editor. You'll see that this particular object, which is all one object, so all the pieces have either been attached or seamed to the object, and all the pieces have their UVs on one texture sheet. So it's very similar to what we did with the normal mapping. Also, the UVs cannot overlap for the ambient occlusion to work right because different sides or similar pieces are going to have different information for the ambient occlusion. And we can't have them overlapping, or you're just going to get weird results where Max tries to calculate two pieces in the same space. Same as we did with the normal map, basically. Now, my shader that's on here right now has a diffuse map, which looks like this. You can see all the elements are separate. It has a specular map, which looks like this. And it has a normal map, which looks like this. So I've got three textures already on here in these slots, and I want an ambient occlusion map that eventually is going to pop in here to the self-illumination slot. Okay, the first thing we need to do is put some light in the scene. Now, ambient occlusion has to come from a ambient occlusion type of light. Now, Max has a skylight built into it that we can use, and it works pretty well for ambient occlusion. You can also use just a regular light array that we've covered in earlier classes, where we've got 30, 40 lights in the scene around the object and casting shadows in many different ways to get that kind of fuzzy shadow look. I'm going to use a skylight for mine. I'm also going to collapse this stack down just so you don't get confused and think that has anything to do with what we're doing. My light I'm going to make is a skylight. I'm just going to pop it over here. Now, let's do this. Let's just put it here at the top. Now, where the skylight is located in the scene really doesn't matter, but I'll put it over the top just so you can see it. That's our icon for it. And we need to activate the skylight by going to Advanced Settings, Light Tracer. And at this point, it's now active. If you want to delete it, you'll need to delete it. You'll need to turn this off as well as delete the icon. But I'm going to leave everything else the default setting for it. And now I'm going to lost my train of thought for a second. I'm going to go over to my render to texture dialog now. First, select the object and hit 0 on your keyboard, or you can access it through rendering and render to texture. Selecting the object first puts it here in this slot. So that's the first thing we want to do. Next, we're going to set the folder that we want to save our maps in. You don't have to save the maps directly to a different folder, but I like to save them to the folder, and that way I can just go get them later and put them into my shader. We're going to scroll down. We're going to leave the render settings just as they are. Your object should be here in this box. Under padding, if your UV layout is really close together, you'll probably want to drop this down to 1. The default's 2. So I'm going to leave it at 2. We do not need projection mapping for this, so we don't have to use the cage or anything that we used on normal mapping. Now, if you're taking your ambient occlusion information from a high poly model down to a low poly model, you will have to use this, same as the normal map. But for ours, we're taking it directly off this model, so we don't need to. Use existing channel. This will use the layout, the UV layout that you already have, which is what we want. And then we go down here to this area. We're going to hit Add, and we're going to use a lighting map. And we'll just say Add Elements. Now we need to change a few things here. First of all, the size is wrong. I'm going to use the same size as my other maps, which was 1024. That's really pretty big for an ambient occlusion map. You can get away with 256. There's not a lot of information on the ambient occlusion map, but I'm just going to leave them the same size for the time being. And by default, this slot here will be empty. Mine actually showed up here because I'd been practicing this before I started the video. But you set this down here under Target Map Slot, and default is blank. We want it to be self-illumination. Okay? And we're going to scroll down a little bit farther. Every element up here, which could be any of these elements here, comes with its own settings down here in this area. So if you were to highlight this, and you would get your own settings down here for each one of those that you pick. So you could pick different light maps, render out a whole bunch of different sizes as you want at one time. We're going to output into source. That's going to shoot it right into this map slot, which will work for us. And we should be ready to go at this point. So I'm going to hit render. Make sure everything's set up. Yep. Okay, I'm going to hit render. Now, it may tell you the file already exists, which in my case it does, so I'm just going to overwrite the existing file. And it's going to think for a while because it has to calculate that skylight that's in the scene. And it's going to render this out. Now it's going to render out the diffuse map first, and that's what you're going to see. This is similar to what we got with the normal map, if you remember. Our ambient occlusion map has now rendered. You'll see it here. Now this is not actually the ambient occlusion map. In render to texture, Max will render the diffuse texture underneath, or on top of, I guess you could say, the map that it's currently rendering. This is the same reason why when we rendered a normal map we didn't get the blue looking normal map, but it's still turned up once it was done or baked. So this is what rendered, and it took about, I don't know, 5-6 minutes on my machine here. Because of the skylight, it's going to take a little while. Now this, if you remember, under our settings here, it said that it would put it in the self-illumination slot. As soon as it was done rendering, if I check my shader, it popped it here in the self-illumination box. So I can close this. And if we take a look at our map, here's the map that it actually rendered and put into that box. And you can see that it's all grayscale. These are the shadows that are being cast onto the object by itself. And we get these nice soft shadows because we used a skylight. You have to use a light that's shining from all directions so that you get these soft shadows. And it's going to give us a little bit more form to our gas pump when we're all done. Now, let's take a look at the differences here in this. I'm going to maximize, well, not that one, this one. Let's maximize this screen, zoom out a little bit here. We'll move this guy over so we can see it. I'm going to take the skylight out of the scene at this point. So I'm going to select the skylight. I'm going to delete it. Actually, first I'm going to save it, I think. And I'll save it here. It's going to be called something different for Game Institute's video when we're done, but that way you can at least have the same scene that I had. Okay, now I'm going to delete the skylight, and we'll just delete it. Remember, you got to turn it off up here under Advanced Rendering as well, so this has to be turned off. And now if we were to render this, we get a regular ambient light render, so no lights in the scene. you can see here there's only the stuff from the regular scene in there. And now I'm going to play with this shader, and we'll turn off some of these. So I'm going to turn off the diffuse color, and let's turn off specular and bump. And what we're left with is just our ambient occlusion map. So there's no shadow or no lighting in this scene, but you can see that my object has some lighting burned into it. If we rotate this around and zoom in here, let me turn off this diffuse color that you're seeing so you don't get confused. And you can see all of this shadowing that you're seeing in here is burned into the object. So right along this edge, this down here, that's all burned into the object. And if we turn on just diffuse, that's just the diffuse layer. So that's our diffuse texture. If we turn on just our specular, that's our specular layer. You can see we're hitting some highlights here. And if we turn on just our bump map, we're getting the bump from the bump map. So we have many different layers on this at this point. I'm going to turn all of these on now. Oops, there we go. And our total map combined looks like this. And if we were to put a target light or spotlight in the scene, we could get a much better render. All those different maps would be working together. Let me drag out our occlusion map just to finish up our little collection. So there's our 4 maps that we would usually use in games at this point, and all on our